The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are pleased to welcome to this week's show United States Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District, which covers York, Adams, Cumberland, and Dauphin counties. He is a member of the Republican Leadership Caucus and serves as the chairman of the powerful House Freedom Caucus, a subset in the Republican caucus. And he is a successor to that former chairman of the Freedom Caucus, Congressman Trey Gowdy, who became a nationally influential figure. Scott serves on key committees such as Transportation and Infrastructure, Oversight, as well as Foreign Affairs. His personal story is compelling and has to be heard to be believed. He is a grandson of Colombian immigrants and the son of a single mother who had to work several jobs to support her children. Scott and his family were on public assistance for years. To say he did not enjoy the comforts of life would be an understatement, as for years there was no electricity or plumbing in his home, and he bathed in a steel tub on the porch in the water he pumped from a well, and cut firewood with his older brother for heat in the wintertime. At age 13, Scott, to help his family, began working as a fruit picker on a farm, and also worked as a mechanic and dock worker. He put himself through college while working a full-time job, ultimately graduating from Pennsylvania State University with a baccalaureate degree in business administration. Immediately after high school, and before he earned his college degree, he enlisted in the Army, attending basic training at Fort Dix. Scott went on to officer candidate school, graduating as president of his class, and was commissioned an officer, a second lieutenant in the Army. He then went on to Army aviation, becoming a helicopter pilot, and earned qualifications in most of the attack helicopters in the Army's rotary wing. He flew the Huey, the Cobra, the Chinook, the Apache, and the Black Hawk. Scott was promoted to the rank of full bird colonel and commanded the 104th Aviation Battalion, which was deployed to Iraq and where Scott flew 44 combat missions. He was selected to attend the coveted United States War College, where he went on to earn a master's degree in strategic studies. Finally, Scott was promoted to the rank of brigadier general and the assistant division commander of the 28th Infantry Division. He then went on to serve as assistant adjutant general of the Pennsylvania Army National Guard, retiring after 40 years of military service. Scott and his wife Christy have 2 children and reside in York County. On this week's show, we will discuss the Republican agenda that Scott will have a hand in, especially the investigative committees that are going on, as well as get his views on President Biden's State of the Union address.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Congressman, thank you for appearing on the Volpe Report.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's great to talk to you about important things. That people are thinking about today. Yeah.
Well, there's no doubt, and we will get into the State of the Union. And my audience has already heard in my open your exceptional credentials. You're clearly one of the leaders. One of the Democratic, issues for the Democrats is that you guys have coalesced. It took not a historic, but a number of votes. 15 wasn't unprecedented, but a lot. So you're together now, which is, I think, great for the Republican Party and the country. So your view on moving forward with the investigation, some of the things we're going to talk about, the American people care about. My sense from Congressman Muser that was just on the show was that we're strong, we're united. These little dust-ups are good for the party because we air our grievances, and when we settle, we have representation on committees that needed to be there, and the concessions that were made us stronger. I'd like your take on that.
Yeah, look, the concessions weren't really concessions at all. They were wins for the American people. They were wins for the Republican Party, the Republican Conference, and quite honestly, Congress in general. it's sometimes hard to see the forest for the trees when you're in there, and time goes by and you don't realize how much you've gotten away from doing the people's work. And so, for instance, just a week and a half ago, we had the first amendments on the floor for the first time in 10 years. We will have the first amendments on appropriations bills on the floor this year for the first time in 7 years. So we needed to change that process, but you're absolutely right. It was never personal for me with anybody, but we knew that we just couldn't maintain the status quo here and expect a different outcome. So the difference between Republicans and Democrats is that we'll handle our differences because we don't all march to whatever Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, or Barack Obama orders us to do. We are free-thinking individuals. We are rooted in the Constitution and the rights that are provided by the good Lord himself and enshrined in that Constitution. We settle our differences. We air them out. You saw it, right? That's democracy. That's a democratic Republican action. We aired out our differences. We settled those differences, and now we're moving forward against the left and the Democrat Party, as opposed to fighting amongst ourselves for the next 2 years. Now, what we're going to do is push back on what they're doing to destroy the Republic, what they have been doing, and we're going to march together in that effort. So, look, sometimes you gotta have a little family squabble in a republic. It's done out in public so everybody can see. So it looks a little messy, but everybody can see what happened. They can see what the wins were for them and everybody else. And I think that most people, look, they didn't love that, but they'd rather spend 4 days doing that and the rest of the 2 years fighting the left than spending the 2 years fighting amongst ourselves and the left, which isn't very productive.
You mentioned in the same breath as former Speaker Pelosi and President Biden, former President Barack Obama. And that's a name that managed to stay somewhat hidden to a degree and out of the fray of the spatter of the difficulty in politics. But what kind of influence do you believe the former president is exerting in this administration? Because to me, it was significant that you threw his name right in there.
Yeah. Well, look, I think he's exerting significant interest, maybe not himself personally, but certainly through his cohorts and his affiliates that are working within the Biden administration and work in the swamp ubiquitously throughout D.C. perennially. And so, look, I don't think it's a big mystery or it's a big surprise to anybody to think that President Biden has some mental capacity issues where he might not fully understand every single thing that's happening in the rough and tumble that must be the presidency. Somebody is doing that work every single day. Somebody's promoting policy. Someone is furthering an agenda. Remember, President Obama, when he was candidate, Obama said, we're going to fundamentally transform America. And a lot of people didn't say, well, wait a minute, what's wrong with America that needs to be transformed? We didn't, maybe some Americans didn't think that far, but that's been his goal. That is the goal of the hard left. That is the goal of the Marxist takeover of this country. And so Joe Biden, in my opinion, is just a placeholder. Let's face it. It's not like President Obama wanted to rush out early in the primaries or even late in the primaries and endorse Joe Biden, right? He never thought he was the right guy for the job. What he's interested in is moving his agenda forward, and I think he's doing that through different means, not directly, because I think it would be pretty obvious and it would be damaging to that effort. So he's working through his surrogates that are embedded in the D.C. swamp to move forward that agenda that he has sought to move since he was a candidate or before.
Well, in that excellent and expansive answer, Congressman, to me, you've raised an issue that has a lot of my Democratic friends, because I have a lot of those still after 45 years, as we talked about in the party. The responsible and moderate Democrats, even conservative Democrats that I used to be. But they scratch their heads, but I think you have hit on something I'd like to go further with. How could Joe Biden seek a second term? A majority of Democrats, a growing majority, don't want him to seek re-election, don't think he's up to it. A significant percentage of the country has serious doubts about his capacity to lead. And therefore, you would think they're setting up the Democratic Party for a catastrophe in the presidential race in 2 years. But then again, if the core of the old Obama administration and the levers of power that are still there, they were put out for a while because Hillary lost, but they came rushing right back in when Biden was elected.
Right.
Maybe the agenda is that we'll keep him there for another 4 years so that we can keep manipulating and furthering the substantive transformation of America. I mean, what are your thoughts on that potential theory?
Look, if you're Joe Biden, you never campaigned for the presidency. You spent your time in a basement, and somehow, surprising to everybody, including Joe Biden, I think, you won the presidency. Now, we don't have to litigate whether it was fair or not or how that happened, but he won the presidency without doing much, let's face it. And so I think from an ego standpoint, he feels like, hey, I already got here once. Now I'm the president. Certainly, I can do better. I got more votes than anybody in recorded history, according to President Biden, right? So why wouldn't I do that? And if you're the people in the Obama team and that camp, that Marxist ideology, you have the perfect vessel. You've got this guy out there that doesn't know what he's saying. He can be manipulated to do anything, say anything. The press goes along with it. Yeah, there's some people disgruntled in the party, but let's face it. At the end of the day, Mr. Volpe, you and I both know, not like no one else, Democrats will put aside any difference they have for the agenda. They will take the hits for the agenda. So they're going to close ranks on whoever it is. And if it's Joe Biden and furthering their policy agenda, they're going to be absolutely thrilled to do that for the next 4 years. They just want to make sure that whoever it is viable, because they must maintain the executive branch where that awesome authority is to further their agenda and complete the transformation of America to a Marxist, essentially totalitarian operation like so many other countries around the globe.
The Democratic policy on energy, from oil and fossil fuel, including natural gas, has been all the way back to the Obama administration to intentionally jack prices, to push price hikes. Why? So people use less of it so they can get back to their environmental new agenda. And here's where the hypocrisy for me comes in. They talk and blather, and I'm using that word pejoratively, I understand. They blather about the working class and the middle class. They care about them so much. And yet, they are engaged in policies to drive up interest rates, make it impossible for businesses, small businesses, the economic engine of our economy, to get loans. They are influencing banks to disincentivize them to invest in small business and fossil fuel. Going on, they have the highest energy costs in a lifetime, in several generations. Food prices are the highest they've been in my lifetime. So this is the working class of America. 60% of American working families, Congressman, as you're aware, live paycheck to paycheck. 60%. There's your middle class, and they're getting buried by Democratic policies. Take it from there.
They absolutely are. And what they don't realize, what you have realized, but many haven't, is the Democrat Party of the old days of John F. Kennedy, Harry S. Truman, the Democrat Party that had this standard. We're working for the little guy, the guy that doesn't have a voice. That Democrat Party doesn't exist. Only the name of it exists because people are comfortable with it. But let's face it, we just had a vote on the floor last week on socialism, a bill saying that the evils of socialism. Do you know 100 Democrats voted against it? We weren't saying they were socialists. We were just saying that socialism is bad. 100 Democrats voted against that bill. So what's happened is the socialist wing has taken over the Democrat Party, but because people are not necessarily all comfortable with socialism yet, these folks have retained the name Democrat because it's politically palatable. But let's face it, there is a push to socialize a socialist government, to impose a socialist government on America, socialist policies, socialist totalitarian, freedom-robbing policies that are controlled by a very few people from Washington, D.C., or at the top, so to speak. That's been the goal all along, and you're seeing the manifestation of it in these policies that actually hurt the working class, that hurt the middle class, but people don't sometimes see it. It's cloaked, and they talk rhetorically about cleaning up the environment. Well, who's not for a clean environment? I've got 2 small children. I'm drinking the same water. I'm breathing the same air. So are my kids. I'm concerned about them. I'm concerned about my mother. I want the same thing. What they don't tell you is that the United States does it cleaner than everybody else, and we don't have to do these things. We don't have to have these price increases associated with the Green New Deal to have a clean environment. We don't have to have these price increases associated with unaffordable food to have the things that we want. It's all based on energy, and unfortunately, the socialists and the green left not only want you to stop using fuels that actually work and are clean, they literally want to control you. So take it to the next level. The next level is they don't want you driving. They don't want you driving your personal car. If it is a personal car, it must be an electric car that they can control when you charge it, if you charge it, and where you go. They want you on public or mass transit if you're going to go anywhere at all. They want you eating certain things, but only certain things that they prescribe. So let's face it, there's an assault on beef, and you've seen parts of it, but it's going to continue. Those are the policies of the socialist left. It's really about control, and people just don't get it. It's cloaked in other things that are supposed to make you feel good, like clean water, clean air, and of course we want all those things. But they act like the cost isn't borne out by the people that are forced to pay for things that they don't need or completely unnecessary, and rob them of their freedoms eventually.
Let's talk about Gensler, the SEC chairman, along with the major investment, the BlackRocks of the world, and they are now promoting something called ESG. And for our audience's benefit, you're well aware of it. Environmental, social, corporate governance is the G. But what this basically is a woke socialist agenda. And they say, well, where's the socialism? Well, here is, in a nutshell, is the socialism. It's that what used to be shareholder equity and shareholder capitalism, where the entrepreneurs, the risk takers, the people investing their life savings to start a small business, the drivers of our economy, is being changed to stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism, let's get this. This is for the workers, the employees, people affected by corporate decisions, that's a pretty wide net. And now we're going to dictate policies based on the woke agenda in terms of our investment and our investment incentives. And what BlackRock, the biggest, I think, still in the world, they're telling their investors, we need to be in this, but don't be in that, because they promote fossil fuel production. And are you kidding me? That's where we're at in this country.
What's actually worse is they don't tell their investors. So we have a standard in the United States of America that corporations with stockholders have to base their investment on return on investment. So they have to maximize the investor's return. That's the job of the corporation to their stockholders. That's stockholder equity. But what we're talking about is shareholder equity. So I haven't invested anything in the company, but yet I get a stake in what happens in it. That's the socialist part of it. And so to your point with BlackRock, they're refusing to allow their investors, the money that they get from their investors, to invest in things like oil exploration or gas exploration and drilling and refining and so on and so forth. But they don't even tell their investors that. So their investors aren't making as much money as they could, but they don't even know it. They essentially lie, which is against the law, but the Securities and Exchange Commission won't prosecute any of these things. At the same time, by the way, I'll remind all your listeners, if they don't know, your viewers, that we're allowing we're allowing investments into China that don't have to abide by the same standards as American companies do. We're actually allowing and abetting and furthering that. So that's the ESG portion of it. Look, it is the long march through the institutions. It happens slowly, but pervasively through academia. You see it now. You see it at post-secondary schools and secondary schools, but now you see it at your local publicly funded school where they indoctrinate your children instead of teaching your children. You see it in Hollywood. Now you see it in sports. You're seeing it in the boardrooms, like we talked about with BlackRock. It is pervasive, and it's changing everything, the traditions and the bedrock of the United States American economy and society, which is their goal. It is the Marxist march through the institutions, all of them, every single thing you can think of, including law enforcement. I mean, look at the DA in Philadelphia. Do you think it's by happenstance that George Soros funded the DA's race, and you've got a guy down there that refuses to enforce the law, and you've got rampant crime? And oh, by the way, it's Soros today. It was Rockefeller before. After Soros is gone, it'll be his kids. It'll be somebody else. The important thing is to watch the agenda and do something about the agenda, which is turning America into a socialist, Marxist country with a totalitarian government.
And we've covered such large swaths of this onslaught of the America that the founders intended and that so many people fought and died for. It's changing. And
Right.
you have a military background, and so your views are somewhat more prescient on this. Let's talk about, now speaking of military and defense, how this turning off of all of our fossil fuel and energy production has destroyed effectively and altered the geopolitical balance. I've said in this show a number of times with guests like the president of the Pennsylvania Chamber and others that here's the danger with what we've done with our shutdown of fossil fuel and gas and all that. Our NATO allies, before the Ukraine invasion, were already being compromised by Vladimir Putin because instead of looking to the United States, their partner and sponsor in NATO effectively, to get further energy needs, we shut everything off and said, good luck. And they were shutting down their energy. Places like Germany, France, and others shutting it down so that when Putin felt emboldened enough that they're going to have to come to me and Russia for gas and energy to keep their people from freezing to death, that'll be a nice time to slip across the border into Ukraine. What are they going to do about it effectively? So your thoughts on how it's compromised our ability in our defense, because there are enemies we have in the world out there that are rushing to take advantage of the travails you've talked about going on with the progressive Democrats in our country.
Well, look, all these decisions are viewed or watched very closely by our adversaries and by our allies. As a guy who spent a long time in uniform, of course, the march through the institutions includes the military down at somewhere around 50% recruiting capacity because nobody wants to join anymore. They watch what happened in Afghanistan. They don't want to be a part of leaving the victory behind, leaving their comrades behind. And of course, the world watches, and we display weakness on every turn. There's a huge weakness displayed right there. The first meeting that the new administration has with the communist Chinese, they humiliate us. They just fly a surveillance balloon across the United States of America for essentially a week, and then the president in the State of the Union doesn't even acknowledge this. It says he's standing up against China. These are all, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's Iran, whether it's North Korea, these actions are provocative because we are showing that we are weak, unable, unwilling, incapable of defending our interests right here at home or abroad. And so there are people and nations and nation states that are willing to take advantage of that. And you're seeing them take advantage of it in real time right before us. And it's being normalized in America. We're going to look. I mean, TikTok. We've got a spy balloon flying across the country. We're right to be angry about it and demand that the administration does something about it before it gets here. In the meantime, we've got 100 million homes in America using TikTok, where the Chinese communists are hoovering up. They're vacuuming up all your information to be used against you, and the government doesn't do anything about it except continue to promote it and allow it.
Let me have your take overall on the State of the Union, because apparently everything is great. Robust economy, jobs all over the place, 5 million new jobs, and we're meeting our responsibilities both at home and abroad. Pick a spot, Congressman.
Well, look, Mr. Volpe, I'm like you. I live in the real world. So I would characterize it this way. To me, it was detached from reality. I mean, you talk about, again, the president in the State of the Union, he brings up China, which he needs to. He should. It's a big issue. They're our adversary because they said they are. They've been at war with the United States for 20 years at least. He brings it up and then says that he's standing firm against the Chinese communists. Meanwhile, like the day or two before, this spy balloon is hovering over the United States and sensitive military sites for essentially a week, collecting all this information. It's like he's toned up to reality. Then he brings up fentanyl. 107,000 deaths across the United States, over 5,000 in Pennsylvania over the last 2 years. And he doesn't even acknowledge the fact that the border is wide open, that since his administration took over, 4 times the amount of people crossed illegally in the first year, 5 times in the second year. The law didn't change. The Border Patrol didn't change. You know what changed? His unwillingness to enforce the laws that currently exist. They didn't change. He just refuses to enforce them. Yet he brings it up and acts like the border's secure, and somehow fentanyl doesn't have anything to do with a wide open border. It was this cognitive dissonance where we live in this world of reality, and somehow the president of the United States literally can't acknowledge it. While people are struggling to pay their bills, he's talking about teenagers and no compete clauses to work at McDonald's or Burger King, and everybody's thinking, what in the world is he talking about? I can't pay my electricity bill. I can't afford to fry eggs in the morning for my children before they go to school. What is happening?
Well, there were a couple of times, and I'd like you, for the record, and it's been stated on this show for 10 years by Republican elected officials as yourself, Republican candidates who are always hit with this charge. And the president made the charge last night to some yelling in rebuttal about how the Republican agenda wants to do away with things like Medicare and Social Security. And can you once and for all explain that that's not the Republican agenda as I understand it? No candidate or elected official has said that, and yet the president keeps talking about doing away with these essential things to scare people, obviously. Go ahead.
Right. It's look, as you got it, it's the normal straw man. They stand up the straw man that exists in their mind because they don't have any real ideas, and they can't really criticize anything meaningful. So they stand the straw man up. The straw man is Social Security and Medicare, and they say the Republicans are going to push Granny over a cliff. Remember the commercial? No Republicans are talking about this. The only one that's talking about it is Joe Biden and the Democrats, because they have nothing else to discuss, right? Social Security benefits and Medicare benefits are not going to be touched. But at the same time, just think about this, Mr. Volpe, that at the end of December, right before Christmas, the Democrats alone passed a $1.7 trillion spending spree, of which no money exists for. And then literally days later came to the Republicans and said, well, we got a debt crisis you got to solve. Well, somehow it's going to be solved, and you can't solve it by spending money that we don't have. And yet President Biden stands up there and says, I'm not negotiating. I just maxed out the credit card. I exceeded the credit card. You Republicans are going to pay for it. And after you're done paying for it, you're going to increase the limit. I'm sorry. That ain't going to happen.
Thank God. Thank God. That's the old line I said with some of my guests. It's like, the folks that get into, unfortunately, over their head with credit card debt, revolving 22, 24% interest. It's ridiculous. But at any rate, they finally understand they're bankrupt, and they go to a financial consultant or CPA and lawyer, and they say, here's how you get out of debt. You got to get a low-interest loan, consolidate it on a monthly payment you can afford so you can feed your children, pay your light bill, all of the above. Of course, the first thing you do when you leave this office is cut up your credit card to stop the spending. Because if you settle one and then go buy all new credit cards, you're going to be in a place you can't come home from. Is that a bad analogy, or is it something?
No, that's exactly right. Somebody in a family has maxed out their credit card. We've all seen it. We all know somebody that's done it. It's happened in our families. It's happened to a friend. You have to satisfy the obligation, right? You got a debt. You have to satisfy it. But you don't just say, well, now that we paid the bill, go ahead and just keep spending even more. No one says that.
No kidding. Congressman, we are running out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank you for making time. I know how busy you are, and we will stay tuned. I hope as we go further, there are some fights looming you've alluded to, and if we can ask you to come back. Our district, so you know, we cover all of northeast and central Pennsylvania. We go as far west as Williamsport. We don't get as far south as you, but 3.5 to 4 million people are in this media market. Right. And it's important they hear what they can hear from our left media outlets, print and television. Right. And so it's important to hear your voice. So I hope you will come back on in the future.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to it. And God bless you and your audience.
Thanks so much, Congressman. God bless.